Jimin burst out laughing, clutching her stomach. Oh, don't even start. I woke up in the kitchen pantry of all places with a whisk in my hand. I think I had some grand ambition to bake something at 3 a.m., but I ended up just falling asleep among the flour bags. I woke up covered in white powder. I looked like a powdered donut. Taeyoung managed a small, genuine smile at their antics, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. The contrast between their light-hearted, chaotic morning and the dark, looming dread Jungkook had left in his wake was jarring. Jenny reached over and took Taeyoung's hand, her expression softening. We were all so wasted, tease. It's like a blur. I remember us all laughing. Then suddenly the world decided to spin on its axis. But seriously, honey, we were worried about you because you were so quiet when you left with Jungkook. We just want to make sure you're good, Jimin added, her playful tone fading into something more sincere. We know how you guys get, but seeing you like this, it feels different this time. You're shaking, TA. Taeyoung pulled her hand back slightly, her gaze drifting toward the window. The fear of Jungkook's game was a cold weight in her stomach that no amount of funny stories could dissolve. I think I said things I shouldn't have, Taeyoung murmured, her voice trembling. And now I have to face the consequences. You guys don't understand, ... He's not just angry. He's planning something. She looked at her sisters, seeing their genuine concern, and felt a pang of guilt for dragging them into her web of fear. I'm fine. Really, she lied, forcing a breath. I just need a bit more time to shake off this hangover. Maybe if I just go down there and apologize, he'll drop whatever game he's playing. Jenny looked at her skeptically, but before she could press further, a heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the hallway outside. The sound of footsteps that were all too familiar, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside the bedroom door. The atmosphere in the room froze instantly. The heavy footsteps outside the door stopped and the handle turned, but it wasn't Jungkook. It was just a house staff member checking if they needed anything, giving everyone a collective sigh of relief. Jenny, oh, thank goodness. For a second there, I thought it was going to be Jungkook coming back to lecture us. The tension that had gripped Taeyoung snapped like a rubber band. The absurdity of their collective hungover state suddenly hit them all at once. Jin, okay, seriously, if anyone mentions the floor lamp incident, I'm leaving the country. That is the secret between me and that lamp. Jimin, you were bowing to it, unhe. You were like, I am so terribly sorry for stepping on your shadow, Sir Lamp. Taeyoung, who had been shivering with terror only moments ago, let out a bubbling, genuine laugh. The image of Jen apologizing to a piece of furniture was so ridiculous that her anxiety couldn't help but evaporate. Taeyoung, I think the flower ghost is a bigger issue. You really look like a powdered donut, Jiminy. Jimin, hey, it was high-quality flour. At least I smell like a bakery. Jenny linked her arms with Taeyoung and Jin, pulling them toward the door. Jenny, come on, let's go downstairs. I'm starving, and if we don't get some actual breakfast into our systems, I think I'm going to start talking to the refrigerator next. They marched out of the bedroom, a disheveled, laughing parade. They were all stumbling slightly, clutching their heads, and making jokes about their lack of coordination. Taeyoung followed her sisters, feeling a strange sense of liberation. Jungkook was downstairs, probably waiting, but for this moment, she was surrounded by her sisters, basking in their ridiculous reality. She wasn't thinking about the game or the punishment anymore. She was just thinking about how good it felt to laugh. Jin, do you think the others have finished cleaning up the living room? Or am I going to have to dodge more pizza crusts? Jimin, if there's any pizza left, I'm calling dibs. As they reached the staircase, Taeyoung looked down. She could see Jungkook waiting in the living room, his posture relaxed, his eyes scanning T. He stares as they descended. As soon as Taeyoung caught sight of him, her smile faltered. her heart hammered against her ribs, and the phantom sensation of his hands on her waist made her breath hitch. She gripped the railing so hard her knuckles turned white, her entire body tensing with involuntary, paralyzing fear at the sight of the man who held so much power over her. Jungkook looked up, his gaze locking on to Taeyoung's. He didn't say anything, but his smirk was still there, private, knowing, and entirely directed at Taeyoung. Taeyoung felt a wave of terror wash over her, her legs feeling like lead. She tried to maintain her composure in front of her sisters, but as she descended into the chaos of the living room, every step toward her husband felt like a march into a trap. The living room was a scene of comfortable, albeit slightly chaotic, domesticity. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the remnants of the morning's hangovers. The sisters were settled, each curled up beside their respective husbands, their quiet murmurs and occasional bursts of laughter filling the space. Taeyoung wandered toward the center of the room, looking for a way to ground herself. She spotted little Lily, who was busy trying to entertain herself with a soft rattle on the rug. Taeyoung's heart softened. She scooped the baby up, cradling her close. Lily cooed, reaching out to pat Taeyoung's cheek with her tiny, chubby hand. Scanning the room, Taeyoung realized the only available spot left was on the sofa, squeezed into the small gap right next to Jungkook.
Her breath hitched.
She hesitated, her steps slowing, but she didn't have much of a choice. She moved toward the couch, feeling Jungkook's eyes tracking her every movement. As she sank into the cushion, the familiar scent of his cologne, sharp, clean, and entirely overwhelming, filled her senses. She kept her gaze focused intently on the baby, her body rigid as she felt the heat radiating from him. Just as she was trying to melt into the background, Minhyu, who had been busy playing with his wooden blocks, toddled over. With a determined look, he lugged his favorite collection of colorful toys into the center of the sofa, right between Taeyoung and Jungkook. Minhyu, Tay-Tay, he beamed at her, climbing up to sit in the small crevice between them. He dropped a block near Jungkook's knee and another against Taeyoung's arm, effectively bridging the gap. Jungkook didn't move, but the air around him seemed to thicken. He looked down at the child, then up at Taeyoung, his expression unreadable. Jungkook, look at that, he said, his voice a low, vibrating murmur that only Taeyoung could hear. Even Minhyu knows where you belong. Taeyoung felt a flush crawl up her neck, her hands tightening around Lily as she stared resolutely at the baby's tiny feet. She was trapped between her husband's undeniable presence and the innocent joy of the children, her heart racing as she waited to see what he would do next. Minhyu, blissfully unaware of the tension radiating between the adults, suddenly scrambled off the couch cushion and hauled himself onto Jungkook's lap. He settled into the crook of Jungkook's arm, his small, chubby hands immediately reaching out to touch the intricate ink winding down Jungkook's forearm. Minhyu, Cookie, look, inky? He poked at a tattoo with a sticky little finger, his voice high and chirpy. Does it hurt? Did the ouchie bite you? Jungkook chuckled, the deep, rumbling sound vibrating through his chest and making Minhyu giggle. He didn't pull away. Instead, he gently guided Minhyu's hands, his expression softening in a way that Taeyoung rarely saw when they were alone. Jungkook, no Minna, no bite, it's just permanent drawing, like magic, marker that doesn't wash off. Minhyu, magic? Minhyu's eyes went wide, his head tilting to the side. Can you draw a ducky? Quack, quack? Jungkook, maybe a ducky next time, little man. On the other side of the sofa, the scene was just as lively. Lily was in a fit of hysterical, breathless baby laughter, her tiny body wiggling in Taeyoung's arms. She had grabbed a lock of Taeyoung's hair and was tugging on it playfully, her eyes crinkling shut as she shrieked with delight. Taeyoung, oh, Lilybug, stop! Taeyoung laughed, her own fear momentarily pushed aside by the baby's infectious joy. She buried her face in Lily's neck, blowing a raspberry that made the baby kick her little legs in excitement. You're such a chaotic little thing, aren't you? For a few minutes, the living room felt perfectly normal. The domestic chatter of her sisters and their husbands provided a comforting blanket of noise. However, Taeyoung couldn't ignore the fact that she was physically boxed in. Minho was occupied with Jungkook's tattoos, but Jungkook himself had one arm draped possessively over the back of the sofa, his fingers occasionally brushing against the fabric of Taeyoung's shoulder. Every time Jungkook shifted or laughed at something, Minho said, Taeyoung felt a jolt of awareness. She was caught in a strange, fragile balance, joking with Lily while being hyper-aware of the man sitting just inches away, whose gaze, she felt certain, was still fixed on her whenever she dared to look his way. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the dining hall. As the evening meal was prepared, the air grew heavy with the clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversation. The formal long table was set with precision. Mr. Chun took his place at the head of the table, his presence commanding, with Mrs. Chun gracefully settling into the seat beside him. The other couples moved to their respective places, pulling out chairs and settling in with easy, familiar grace. Taeyoung, her heart performing an anxious rhythm in her chest, hovered near the far end of the table. She spotted an empty chair near Jenny and Jen, hoping to lose herself in their laughter and find a safe distance from the center of the room. She took a hesitant step toward that side, but before she could even reach the chair, she felt it, a gaze so sharp and heavy it felt like a physical touch. She looked up and caught Jungkook's eyes from across the room. He didn't say a word, didn't raise his voice, and didn't even lean forward. He simply sat, perfectly still, his eyes locked onto hers with a cold, absolute command. He tilted his head ever so slightly toward the empty chair directly to his right, the seat next to him. His eyes narrowed, a silent, unmistakable warning flickering in their dark depths. Don't you dare! Taeyoung froze, the blood draining from her face. She felt the eyes of her sisters lingering on her, but the world had narrowed down to the silent order emanating from her husband. The memory of his punishment promise burned in her mind, turning her limbs to stone. She couldn't defy him, not here, not with everyone watching. Slowly, her hands trembling, she turned away from her sisters and began the longest walk of her life toward Baek's side of the table. Every step felt agonizingly heavy. When she finally reached his side, she sank into the chair, the wood feeling icy beneath her. Jungkook didn't acknowledge her arrival with a smile. Instead, as she sat, he shifted, his thigh brushing firmly against hers beneath the tablecloth. An intimate, possessive anchor that made her breath hitch. Jungkook, his voice a low, smooth vibration that only she could hear. Good girl. He poured a glass of wine and set it in front of her, his fingers lingering on the crystal stem. Jungkook, Taeyoung, we have the rest of the night to ourselves, and I have a feeling you've been dreading every second of it. Taeyoung stared down at her plate, her appetite completely vanished, her skin feeling as though it were on fire wherever his presence touched her. The dining room buzzed with the sound of clinking crystal and lively conversation, but Taeyoung felt like she was trapped in a vacuum. She focused on cutting her meat into microscopic pieces, her hand still tingling, where Jungkook's leg remained pressed firmly against hers under the table. Then, the air in the room shifted. Jungkook set his wine glass down with a precise, clinical clink. Jungkook, I'm leaving for Paris tomorrow morning. I have an important series of mergers to oversee. The table went quiet. Mrs. Chun leaned forward, her brow furrowing slightly. Mrs. Chun, Paris? So suddenly? Jungkook? How long will you be gone? Jungkook didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the wine swirling in his glass. Jungkook, a week as of now. It might be extended if the negotiations prove difficult. The men at the table, Mr. Chun, Jin, and Shin, immediately dove into the details, their voices overlapping as they questioned him about the logistics, the market impact, and the competitors involved. Taeyoung felt a strange flutter of hope. A week away, a week of silence. But then Jungkook turned his head. He looked at her, his expression entirely unreadable, before speaking loudly enough for the whole table to hear. Jungkook, Taeyoung is coming with me. Taeyoung's head snapped toward him, her fork clattering loudly against her china plate. The sound echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. She stared at him, her eyes wide with raw, unfiltered shock. The table erupted into chatter. Jin, Jimin, and Jenny beamed at her. Jin, oh Paris, how romantic. Jimin, a week in the city of light? You lucky thing, you're going to have the best time. I'm so jealous. Jenny leaned over, a mischievous glint in her eyes, teasing her relentlessly. Jenny, look at her. She's so shocked she's gone completely speechless. Come on, TA, don't be shy. We all know how much you and Jungkook love your little getaways. Just make sure you bring us back something better than a postcard, or I'm not letting you back in the house. They kept talking, their voices a blur of romantic, getaways, and lovely. But Taeyoung couldn't hear a single word of it. The sound of their joy was muffled, distant. All she could hear was the slow, rhythmic pulsing of her own heart, and the terrifyingly calm way Jungkook was watching her, waiting to see how she would react to his trap. He didn't just want her there. He wanted her somewhere she couldn't run. Somewhere where every door would be locked and every moment would be at his mercy. She felt the ghost of his hands on her waist, and she realized that Paris wasn't a business trip, was his chosen arena for her punishment. The dinner felt like an eternity, each course a slow, agonizing slide toward her inevitable departure. Taeyoung sat pinned in place, her muscles coiled tight as she navigated the remainder of the meal. She felt like a specimen, under glass, every movement scrutinized by the man sitting inches from her. When she tried to take a sip of water, her hand trembled, causing the glass to clink softly against her teeth. Immediately, Jungkook reached over, his large, warm hand covering hers on the table. It wasn't a gentle, reassuring gesture. It was a firm, grounding weight that held her still. Jungkook, careful, Taeyoung, you're shaking. Is the excitement getting to you? His voice was dripping with a mockery so thin even the others noticed. He didn't wait for her answer, instead turning his attention back to his father, but his hand didn't move. He kept his grip on her wrist, his thumb rhythmically stroking the sensitive skin on the underside of her forearm, a touch that felt like a brand. Jenny, still oblivious to the undercurrents of the conversation, leaned forward with a laugh. Jenny, look at them, still so attached to the hip. Stop being so nervous. It's just a business trip, not a kidnapping. Taeyoung forced a fragile, hollow smile, her throat tight. Taeyoung, right, of course. It's just unexpected. Jimin chuckled, swirling his wine. Jimin, well, we'll hold down the fort here. Just try not to get too lost in the romance, you two. Jungkook's fingers tightened on her wrist for a split second, a silent, possessive squeeze. Jungkook, I'll make sure she doesn't get lost, Jimin Nuna. I have a very specific plan for her time in Paris. The double meaning hit Taeyoung like a physical blow. She couldn't look at anyone, She couldn't meet Jenny's teasing eyes or Jin's lovely gaze. She just stared at her untouched dessert, the spoon heavy in her hand. She navigated the rest of the night by becoming a ghost in her own body. She offered monosyllabic answers when addressed, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, her entire existence consumed by the man beside her. Every time he shifted, every time he breathed, she felt the suffocating reality of his control. She knew that the moment the dinner ended and they went back upstairs, the game would truly begin, and there would be nowhere left for her to hide. The walk to their bedroom felt like a slow march to an inevitable end. Taeyoung's heart hammered against her ribs, the quiet clicking of her heels on the marble floor sounding like a ticking clock. Every time Jungkook's hand brushed against the small of her back, the phantom heat of his touch made her flinch, though she forced herself to keep walking. As soon as the bedroom door clicked shut behind them, the air in the room grew heavy and pressurized. She didn't turn to look at him, instead hovering near the doorway, her hands clutching the hem of her shirt until her knuckles turned white. Taeyoung, young cook, ... Her voice was barely a whisper, thin and brittle. She took a steadying breath, trying to summon the courage to fight the path he had carved for her. Taeyoung, I'm not coming. She turned, keeping her eyes fixed on the floorboards, her entire body trembling. Taeyoung, you can go alone. I'll just be a distraction. And honestly, if I come, I'll just be left alone in the hotel room while you're at your meetings. It's better if I stay here. I don't want to be a burden to you while you're trying to work. It's not practical for you to have to worry about me. She poured the excuses out in a soft rush of words, her eyes darting nervously to him and then quickly away. She was pleading, her posture hunched and fragile, hoping that if she sounded reasonable enough, if she made herself sound like a hindrance rather than a companion, he might let the plan slide. Jungkook didn't move. He stood by the door, his silhouette looming large against the dim light of the room. He watched her with an intensity that made her skin crawl, his silence stretching out, more terrifying than any shout. Finally, he took a slow, deliberate step toward her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply closed the distance until she could feel the heat radiating from him, forcing her to back up until she hit the edge of the dresser, trapped. Jungkook, a burden? He reached out, his hand coming up to cup her chin, forcing her to look up and meet his gaze. His eyes were dark, devoid of any warmth, and utterly relentless. Jungkook, Taeyoung, darling, you have it all wrong. I'm not taking you to Paris for your convenience. And I'm certainly not worried about you being a distraction. He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a cold, possessive deliberation. Jungkook, you're coming with me because I've decided you are. And as for being alone, ... don't worry. I have absolutely no intention of letting you out of my sight long enough to feel lonely. Taeyoung felt the hard wood of the dresser digging into her back, a sharp contrast to the cold, possessive touch of Jungkook's fingers on her chin. She was trapped, her heart racing like a hummingbird in a cage, but the raw, primitive need for freedom urged her to try one last time. She swallowed hard, her throat feeling as though it were filled with dry sand. She placed her trembling hands against his chest, not to push him away. She knew that would be futile, but to create a tiny, desperate boundary. Taeyoung, Jungkook, please ... listen. Her voice was barely a breath, shaky and thin. She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, trying to steady herself. Taeyoung, you don't understand. If I go, I'll be nothing but a shadow, following you around to places I don't belong. It's not fair to either of us. Wouldn't it be better if I stayed here? I can study, I can take care of the house, I can I can make sure everything is perfect for when you come back. It's a better use of my time than being trapped in a hotel suite waiting for you to finish. She opened her eyes, pleading with him, her gaze wet and wide. Taeyoung, just just think about it. You'll be able to focus on your meetings without worrying about me. I promise I won't cause any trouble. I'll stay out of your way completely. Please, Jungkook, let me stay. Jungkook didn't blink. He watched her struggle, his thumb still tracing the line of her jaw, his touch light as a feather, yet heavy as lead. He seemed to be savoring the way she was unraveling, the way her logic was failing under the weight of her own fear. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in closer until his forehead rested against hers. The scent of his cologne, musky, expensive, and suffocating, swamped her senses, effectively cutting off her escape. Jungkook, you really think you're bargaining, don't you? His voice was a low, velvet purr, vibrating through her very bones. He shifted, his grip, his hand sliding from her chin to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling into her hair, forcing her head back slightly. Jungkook, you're not staying out of my way, Taeyoung. You are the reason for this trip. You think I'm going to Paris for mergers? Those are just the background noise. He pulled her closer, his lips brushing against her ear, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate whisper. Jungkook, Paris is for us. And the moment you stepped onto that scale of accusing me and defying me, you surrendered your right to negotiate. Keep talking if you want, but every excuse you make just gives me more reasons to keep you locked up in that hotel room. Now, do you want to keep bargaining or do you want to start packing? Taeyoung felt the fight drain out of her, replaced by a cold, numbing resignation. His fingers tightened slightly in her hair, a silent, painful reminder of who held the leash. The dresser bit into her back, but it was nothing compared to the crushing weight of his intent. She stared up at him, her chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. Every word he spoke confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't a business trip. It was an exile. Taeyoung, voice barely a ghost of a sound. I don't have anything packed. She hoped it was a weak enough excuse to buy her a few hours, a few more moments of safety, but his eyes only darkened with amusement. Jungkook, I've already handled that. He didn't let go of her neck. Instead, he steered her away from the dresser, his hand sliding down to grip her upper arm firmly, guiding her toward the walk-in closet. He pushed the door open, revealing a suitcase already standing open on the bench, half filled with her clothes, the ones he had clearly selected for her. Jungkook, there's plenty of room for you to finish the job. You have 10 minutes to get the rest of your things together. He released her arm, but the lingering ghost of his grip burned on her skin. He stepped back, leaning against the closet doorframe, crossing his arms over his chest. He wasn't leaving, he was going to watch her to ensure she complied, to ensure there was no more bargaining left in her. Taeyoung stood paralyzed for a second, looking at the open suitcase. The silk and cotton of her own clothes felt like a betrayal. She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of mercy, but he only tipped his head toward the suitcase, his expression unyielding. Jungkook, 10 minutes, Taeyoung, start packing. With shaky, porcelain-frail movements, she turned to the closet shelves. She grabbed a handful of clothes, her heart thudding in her ears like a drum. She was packing her own confinement, item by item, while he stood there, a silent, watchful shadow, waiting to take her away to a place where there would be no sisters to save her, no Jin or Jenny or Jinny or Jinny or Jinny to laugh with, and absolutely no way out. Taeyoung reached for a soft, cream-colored sweater, her fingers trembling slightly. Each piece of clothing she folded felt heavier than the last, a tactile Reminder that with every item she placed in the suitcase, she was signaling her compliance. She could feel his gaze on her, a weight so tangible it prickled the skin on her back. She didn't dare turn around, but she could sense him standing just behind her, his presence dominating the small closet. She shoved a pair of jeans into the side pocket, her movements becoming hurried. "Jungkook, slow down, Tia." His voice was calm, cutting through the silence of the room. He pushed off the doorframe and took a step into the closet space. The room suddenly felt suffocatingly small. He reached over her shoulder, his arm brushing against hers as he picked up a silk nightdress she had forgotten to pack. He held it up, the fabric shimmering in the dim light, and then he let it drape over his fingers, his eyes never leaving her face. He seemed to relish the way she was holding her breath, clearly enjoying the sight of her wide-eyed, frightened expression as she waited for his next move. "Jungkook, you're making a mess of it, and we aren't leaving in a hurry. You have all the time you need to make sure everything is perfect." He stepped even closer, effectively pinning her against the rows of hanging dresses. He hung the nightdress back on the rack, then turned his attention back to her, his hand moving to gently tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. He smirked, his eyes glinting with a sharp, amused intensity as he studied the fear etched on her face. "Jungkook, why are you still fighting it? Do you really think you have a choice?" Taeyong swallowed hard, her throat tight. She looked up at him, her gaze flickering with anxiety, but she remained silent, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was terrified of the upcoming trip, and Jungkook seemed to find her visible distress incredibly entertaining. "Taeyong, I just... I don't know what you want from me, Jungkook." Jungkook tilted his head, his expression light and playful, though his eyes remained piercing. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over her cheek, just shy of a kiss, clearly savoring her discomfort. "Jungkook, I think you know exactly what I want. And the fact that you're so worried about it only makes it more interesting." He pulled back, his hand smoothing over her shoulder in a slow, deliberate gesture. "Jungkook, 4 minutes left, don't forget your toiletries. I'd hate for you to be uncomfortable on the flight." He turned and walked out of the closet, leaving her in the sudden, jarring quiet. Taeyong stared at the half-packed suitcase, her breath coming in shallow hitches. She wasn't just packing for a trip, she was packing for an experience she knew she wouldn't be able to escape. Taeyong let out a shaky breath the moment he stepped out, the absence of his heavy presence leaving the closet feeling suddenly cavernous. She didn't have the luxury of collapsing. The silence of the room was a warning in itself. Every time a floorboard creaked in the bedroom, her shoulders jerked upward, her eyes darting toward the sliver of light from the doorway. She reached for her vanity bag, her hands moving with a frantic, practiced speed. She packed her skincare, her hairbrush, and the small essentials, her mind racing. Paris. The word felt like a sentence. She kept replaying his smirk, the way he had studied her fear as if it were a performance he was thoroughly enjoying. She finished zipping the suitcase with a sharp zip that sounded deafeningly loud in the quiet. Jungkook's voice drifted from the bedroom, smooth and irritatingly patient. "Jungkook, time's up, Taeyong." Taeyong gripped the handle of the suitcase, her knuckles turning white. She walked out into the bedroom, her heart hammering. Jungkook was standing by the large bay window, looking out at the night sky. He didn't turn around when she entered, but she could see the reflection of his amused smile in the dark glass. "Jungkook, all packed and ready for our little adventure?" He turned then, walking toward her with a leisurely, predatory grace. He stopped inches away, invading her personal space until she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek before he tucked a stray hair behind her ear again, his touch lingering in a way that made her pulse stutter. "Jungkook, you look so pale, sweetheart. Don't worry. I've already arranged for us to have complete privacy for the duration of the trip. No distractions, no sisters, no interruptions." He tilted his head, his eyes dancing with that same sharp, entertained glint. "Jungkook, isn't that what you wanted? To be away from everyone?" Taeyoung couldn't speak. Her voice had completely abandoned her. She just nodded, a small, stiff movement, her eyes fixed on his chin. "Jungkook, good. Then there's no need to stay up any longer. Go to sleep. Taeyoung, we have an early flight, and I want you rested." He steered her toward the bed, his hand guiding her until she sank onto the mattress. He watched with quiet amusement as she climbed under the covers, clutching the edge of the blanket as if it could protect her. He didn't move to join her, though. Instead, he pulled out his phone, his thumb tapping against the screen as he turned slightly toward his desk. "Jungkook, I'll join you within some time. I have some important mails to check." He glanced back at her, his smirk widening as he saw her tense up clearly, dreading the moment he would eventually turn off the lights and climb in beside her. He settled into the chair nearby, his eyes fixed on his device. But Taeyoung knew he was still hyper-aware of her every movement, keeping her firmly within his orbit, even from across the room. The room was suffocatingly still. Taeyoung lay on her side, staring into the dark expanse of the bedroom, her grip on the duvet so tight her fingers ached. Every soft tap-tap of Jungkook's fingers against his phone screen sounded like a countdown. She could feel his presence as clearly as if he were lying right behind her. He didn't even have to look up for her to know that his attention was split half on his emails, half on the way she was trembling under the sheets. The power dynamic felt absolute. He was the one controlling the light, the time, and the very air she breathed. Minutes stretched into an hour. The only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioner and the rhythmic, deliberate clicking of his device. Taeyoung squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force herself to drift off. But the moment she heard the soft click of him locking his phone, her eyes flew open. The chair creaked as he stood up. He didn't rush. He moved with a slow, agonizingly patient cadence, his footsteps muted against the thick carpet. She heard the rustle of fabric as he shed his blazer, then the soft padding of his feet approaching the bed. Taeyoung held her breath, her heart drumming against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt the mattress dip significantly behind her as his weight settled onto the edge of the bed. He didn't lie down immediately. Instead, he hovered there, a shadow in the dim light, watching her. She felt his hand reach out, his fingers tracing the curve of her shoulder, sliding upward to tangle gently, possessively, in the hair at the nape of her neck. He tugged just enough to tilt her head back against the pillow, forcing her to look at him, though she couldn't see his expression. In the gloom, "Jungkook," his voice a low, raspy murmur close to her ear. "I told you to sleep. Taeyoung, why are you still awake?" He leaned in, his chest pressing against her back, his breath warm against the sensitive skin of her neck. He wasn't asking for an answer, he was enjoying the fact that he had kept her waiting in a state of suspended animation. "Jungkook, was the wait too much for you? Or were you just worried about what happens when I finally turn off the lights?" He let out a soft, dark chuckle, his hand sliding down to rest firmly on her waist, pulling her flush against him so there was no space left between them. "Jungkook, rest now. We have a long morning ahead and I plan on keeping you very, very busy once we land." With a final, lingering squeeze, he reached over to the nightstand and clicked the lamp off, plunging them into total darkness. Taeyoung lay frozen, trapped in his arms, waiting for the silence of the night to tell her what he had in store. Taeyoung felt the darkness settle over them like a shroud, heavy and absolute. In the void, her other senses sharpened. The scent of his cologne, a blend of sandalwood and something sharper, filled her lungs. The steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest against her back was the only rhythm she was allowed to follow. His hand didn't move from her waist. Instead, his thumb began to trace slow, deliberate circles against the thin fabric of her sleepwear, a sensation that felt less like a caress and more like a brand. Every time she tried to breathe too shallowly, his hand would firm up, pressing her closer until she felt the solid, unyielding heat of him along her entire spine. "Jungkook, you're still tense." His voice was a low vibration, barely a murmur in the quiet, but it sounded like a thunderclap in the stillness of the room. He didn't wait for her to respond, his fingers sliding up to tangle in her hair again, gently pulling her head back until she was looking up at the ceiling, exposed and vulnerable in the dark. "Jungkook, it's such a waste, spending all this energy on fear when you could just ... surrender." He shifted, his body moving over hers until he was hovering above her, his weight pinning her to the mattress. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel the heat of his gaze, a weight that made her skin prickle with a mixture of terror and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. He didn't make a move to kiss her, nor did he lean away. He simply stayed there, suspended, enjoying the way her breath hitched, the way her entire body had gone rigid beneath him. He was a predator who had already caught his prey, and he was in no rush to finish the game. "Jungkook, I can feel your heart, Taeyoung. It's beating so fast. It's almost loud enough to hear." He leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, his breath a searing contrast to the cool air of the room. "Jungkook, tell me, what exactly is it that you think I'm going to do to you? In Paris?" The question hung in the air, mocking and rhetorical. He didn't want an answer. He wanted her to voice her fears, to hear her admit the power he held over her. Taeyoung clamped her jaw shut, her teeth clicking together. But the silence she maintained only seemed to delight him further. He let out a soft, satisfied hum, his fingers trailing down the side of her neck, tracing the frantic pulse point there. "Jungkook, don't worry. I'll make sure you find out soon enough. Now, close your eyes. You need your strength." He didn't move away. He stayed right there, looming over her, his presence acting as both a cage and a blanket, ensuring that even as she drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep, she would be under no illusion as to who owned the night. Taeyoung didn't dare close her eyes, even though he commanded it. She kept them fixed on the dark, searching for any way to reclaim a sliver of control, but every muscle in her body was locked in a state of paralyzing alertness. She was trapped beneath him, the weight of his body a constant, crushing reminder of her helplessness. Jungkook remained perfectly still, his chin resting against the top of her head, his breathing deep and maddeningly calm. It was as if he were feeding off the frantic energy radiating from her, his own composure growing more absolute by the second. Minutes dragged on, filled only by the muffled sounds of the house settling for the night. Jungkook finally shifted, but instead of moving away, he slid his arms around her, pulling her so tightly against his chest that she could feel the hard, steady rhythm of his heart mirroring the chaos of her own. He wasn't letting her go. He was anchoring her. "Jungkook, you think if you stay awake, you can fight whatever comes next?" He let out a low, amused huff, his chest expanding against her back. "Jungkook, Taeyoung, you're already exactly where I want you. Whether you're awake or asleep, you're mine. And in Paris, you'll realize that fighting is just another way of begging for my attention." He shifted his hand, his palm flattening against her stomach, his touch heavy and possessive. It was a clear warning, a reminder that his grip wasn't just physical, but total. Taeyang felt a shudder run through her, a mix of sheer terror and the suffocating realization that he was right. There was no escape in the dark. There was no escape in the daylight. Jungkook, go to sleep. His command was softer this time, but it carried the finality of a lock sliding into place. He began to stroke her arm in slow, rhythmic, hypnotic sweeps. A gesture that would have been tender with anyone else but felt like a deliberate act of psychological dominance. He wanted her to be exhausted. He wanted her vulnerable. And as his hand continued to map her body in the dark, she realized he was going to hold her like this until morning, ensuring that when they stepped onto that plane, she would be completely drained of the will to resist him. Taeyang finally let her eyes flutter shut, her lashes wet against her cheeks, as she surrendered to the crushing gravity of his presence. She didn't find peace, only a darker, more restless state of waiting for the moment he decided to start their game.